I grew up in the party boat industry. My dad has the Captain Dave out of Sheepshead Bay. I was good friends with Jeff Gutman. I fished with him several times, and I worked a summer for him tile fishing. That's how I got into it.
And I'm AJ Coleman. I'm a full-time deckhand on the Super Hawk, but I started working on the Yankee Caps and started getting into deep dropping. And me and Paul just started doing it together ever since, and we've even tried to start making a business out of it.
So when I was a kid, I always used to hear horror stories about tile fishing. 4-pound weights, giant reels. It takes forever to reel up. Who wants to fish 500-600 feet of water? But since that time, the tackle has gotten much better, and it's a lot easier to fish. And even my first tile fish trip that I went fishing on, I was hesitant to go because I was like, yeah, this is probably going to suck. But I ended up falling in love with it. It's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be. It's like deepwater fluking, more or less. So a little information about the tilefish. Golden tilefish, they normally like muddy bottom. You do find them around structure sometimes. They're usually on the edge of it, not on the structure. They do burrow in packs. They're called pueblos. The reason why they're called tilefish is because they lay in an army formation, the whole school of them, and they burrow into holes, and they look like tiles across the bottom. So when you do find them, you generally find a good amount of them. And you could, in some cases, like on party boats, you could actually wipe that school out if you keep fishing the same spot. See, there's a tilefish there with a long line clip in it. You always see long liners. I know people are against commercial fishing. I'm not. I'm friends with a bunch of commercial guys. They got to make a living too. But you'll notice the long liners, if you do pay attention to them, they'll never set in the same line twice in a year because they know they're going to wipe it out. They need it to regrow. So gray tilefish or blue lines, they like more hard bottom. They do burrow still, like a golden tilefish. They're generally in shallow water, 3 to 550, where goldens are, you catch them anywhere from 300 to up to 1,000 foot of water. The big fish I've been finding are anywhere from 750 to 900 feet. The smaller fish I've been catching in around 500 feet. The blue lines, you don't really see them past 550. At least I haven't yet. And that's what I've been taught by Jeff and, guys that I fished on with his boat.
And if you look, you can see while we were running, we actually got a picture of one of the drops that we just found while we were running, and there was grays there,
That's the first piece of bottom I found while I was running to another drop, and it actually ended up saving the trip, where on top of the structure, we caught decent-sized blue lines, and right when you drifted off the edge of it, we were catching, golden tiles up to 20 pounds, which is a decent-sized fish.
For the shallower water, at least.
Those are some of the nice blue lines we found. What I like about tile fishing, as far as running the boat, it's like a treasure hunt. All winter long, I'm looking at different canyons and looking at the contour lines. Now you have relief shading. You're looking at the relief shading, and you're picking new spots to fish. Like I mentioned before, you could wipe out a spot that you found. They don't move. They don't really move too far. They kind of stay put. But when you catch enough of them, either the rest of them that are there look around. They say, "Wow, there's a lot of neighbors missing. It's time to move." Or you do catch them out. Like on a party boat, it is possible because you're fishing with 25, 30 people. So if you go back to the same spot every single trip, eventually you're going to go back there and catch nothing. So I like to keep searching for new spots. I rarely fish the same spot. I keep it in my GPS if I ever need it. If I'm having a tough day and I have to put customers on fish, I could go back to it because I know there's still fish there. But it's, like I said, it's like a treasure hunt for me. I keep going, and you're looking for gold. And it makes it exciting, There's trips I've had where all day long it's catching nothing. Finally, one of the spots that I picked out in February, when I was when I was just looking at a chart, I go to it and it's game on. It's a 3-hour drift and everyone's just catching single and doubles and it saves the trip. And now you found a new spot to fish or a new area to fish.
You could go back to that one for a second, Paul. A lot of these fish that he found that trip, he was on New Bottom. And, that was on his dad's boat, running the boat. But, that was going down south and kind of just looking and, finding new stuff and not, thanks to Paul, just looking for New Bottom and not overfishing anything.
You'll see a lot of guys when they run a boat, they get panicked when it's slow fishing and there's not enough fish on the deck. Tile fishing with me, it's different. Like I said, I keep trying, I keep looking at new areas. The canyons too, you get different currents. Sometimes you have to switch sides to get better conditions and whatnot. And it works out every trip for me. I do have a lot of slow starts. Jeff Gutman, when I was working for him, he did tell me, he said, I caught a lot of nothing to find a few spots that hold fish. So if you don't try, you don't know what's there, and eventually you do find the honey holes. The Hudson Cave, those of you that are trying to fish on your own boat and are just getting into tile fishing, the Hudson Canyon is probably the easiest one to start looking for your own spots. It's easier fishing. You catch a lot of smaller fish, but it's a good start. That's where I started with my dad's boat. I started picking out spots, and once I got the hang of the Hudson, I started exploring other canyons, and I just continue from there.
You can't be afraid to try new spots. Just give it a half hour, give it an hour, look at where the other spots are. I got to run a few trips this summer for the first time, and there was a lot of catching nothing. But, you start to pick up on okay, there's a few fish over here in this depth. And like Paul was saying with the Hudson, if you have to switch sides to get a different drift or a different current, then you just have to take the ride and, try to find better conditions. I mean, you go uphill, right?
I generally like to drift uphill. You hold better. If you're drifting from 500 down to 700, you keep scoping out. So you want to try to find an area where you could drift uphill, going from deeper to shallower. Your customers or yourself will hold bottom a lot better. You're not scoping out as much. And when you have next to no drift, I don't mind drifting downhill because you're drifting downhill so slow. But for the majority of the time, you want to drift uphill. That's, a lot of times in the Hudson, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see smaller fish. You do see blue lines in the Hudson now. There seems to be more blue lines migrating north, where years ago you never saw blue lines in the Hudson, or even, further east. I know guys are catching blue lines and hydrographers and all that stuff. So they are working their way up north. Their migration's starting to change a little bit. We're going to get into tackle now. It's more or less a high-low rig. I don't know if you guys could see that good.
This is kind of what we have figured out works the best to not get tangled, because that's half the problem. And trying to reduce how much spin as it's going down. That wasn't supposed to happen. We start with the barrel swivel on the top, just going down and even coming up with the fish. As the fish is coming up, you'll see it just spinning on the way up, and that'll ruin your rig if you don't have your barrel swivel on the top. That helps. And then even these little rubber crimp protectors on the way down, it does keep the hook away from your main line. And same with the three-way swivels. You kind of just want to reduce the amount of spinning that you can, and these help a lot. And the length between the two, there's no exact science to it. you kind of just take the guess of putting the two rigs together and you tie it about there. That's all it is. You know, you'll catch them high up off the bottom. Sometimes the bigger fish, even like the top hook too, they're a little more aggressive. They're not afraid to come up off the bottom. And sometimes you won't catch anything on the top hook. It's just like any other, you know, fluking or anything else.
Even porgy fishing, sometimes you only catch them on the bottom hook.
Yeah. And, you know, usually we'll only go with 2 hooks because anything more than that, you're just going to mess yourself up more than anything. And a lot of times we'll go with 2. If we're trying to target bigger fish, we'll only go with 1 hook right in the middle, kind of, so you can't break the 2 fish off. Because if they go in 2 separate directions with all that force, you could just break the rig in half and possibly lose both the fish.
I've seen people lose fish on a 130-pound test. They are strong fish, and you are reeling them up far way up.
Yeah.
So when I worked with Jeff, he had 1 hook spots, and if you got caught using 2 hooks, when he made the announcement, you actually got disqualified from the pool because he got tired of losing so many big fish that he made that rule up, you know. And I kind of stay true to that. It's tough if you get a 50 and a 30-pound fish. The odds of you getting that up are now tougher.
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll tie just a sinker, you know, just a normal loop at about the height of, you know, the knot lining up with the hook, and we'll tie this with anywhere from 60 to 100, but just as long as it's lighter than your main line. So if you don't get stuck a lot because you're mostly fishing over mud, but if you do get stuck, to break everything off is a lot harder in that deep water. So you always want to start out with a lighter mono on your loop, and then we'll tie these with anywhere from 80 to 150 pound mono. And so far, we really haven't been able to see them being line shy, being that deep. You know, light does penetrate to 650 feet.
Going back to there with the long line, what do they use? They got to use 250 pound test, and they catch them all the time. So they're definitely not line shy.
And you don't need to use fluoro. We've only stuck with mono. The only benefit to fluoro that I see for this is it's a little bit more rigid than the mono, so it might help you not get tangled as much. But usually the main line we tie here is like usually 100, 80 to 100. You know, if you're fishing in the Hudson and you're just exploring around, you could go a little lighter. But if you're trying to fish deep and trying to look for bigger fish, well, you know, they're not afraid of 150. You know, we've caught plenty of fish on them. And we like to tie all of our rigs with knots. A lot of people like to crimp. And we've seen the little notch in the crimps break. Just, you know, they have the crimp protectors inside of the loop sometimes, but a lot of times when you're tile fishing, you don't really think about doing that, so you don't. And tying the knots, I really can't say I've breaking too many off from my knot. And you also are less likely to get tangled up because the crimps set up just somewhere for someone else's line to get caught right in the tag end of the crimp. And when you're fishing on a party boat or a little boat, you could actually get cut off from that if someone's braid gets caught in there. And then you could lose a rig for no reason.
And speaking about party boat fishing, for those of you that go fishing on party boats, definitely stay away from the crimps. The tangles get 10 times worse when you got braid involved with crimps, and then you have to cut the rig apart and this and that. It's a lot easier to just cut a knot off and not worry about your braid getting frayed up by the crimp. Also, when you are party boat fishing, tangles are 10 times worse. A lot of times customers don't pay attention when, you know, the captain's backing the boat down to keep the line straight. They just drop down. The next thing you know, the sinker just went underneath 5 people, and they don't realize now you're in a 5-way tangle. it does get hectic. You have to pay attention more on party boats than you do on private boats and charter boats. Charter boats, you were taking 6 guys out. It's a little more personable. I could tell the guys, hey, watch your lines for a second, and before I back up, I make sure everyone's looking at them. When you have 20, 30 people on a boat, it's tough to do that. If you got a deckhand taking out a tangle, another guy gaffing a fish, and the captain's trying to keep the line straight, it's going to happen,
And you could retie on deck.
Yeah, you could just retie on deck, which also, if you're on a party boat, I do recommend using heavier mono too. It's a little easier to work with when you have braid involved in a tangle.
And colored braid.
And colored braid. As far as hooks go, I personally prefer J hooks. I'd say 90% of the people that tile fish, they like circle hooks. It's easier with electric reels. I like swinging for the hills. I'm a hand crank guy, so J hooks work better for me. Most people do use circle hooks though.
Like I use circle hooks, and when I first started tile fishing, I only used electrics because that's just what you started with. And with the circle hook, a lot of guys think you just have to start reeling, but you actually set the hook with the circle hook, just like a J hook almost. It's the same exact motion. If you're electric reel fishing, you could just start going full speed on your electric and you could still hook the fish. But if you're hand crank fishing, when you set the circle hook, you actually usually will have enough belly in the line that it almost is like starting to reel in. So it's the same action, and you could set the hook with the circle hook the same as you can with the J hook.
That and our rigs, I personally like plain hooks. I know a lot of people like putting jewelry on, like people fluke and they like to put 10 pounds of stuff on their rig.
Skirts and squids and
skirts and all that stuff. Plain hook works fine with me with tile fish. All you need is a good strip bait and a whole squid. That's what I like to use. The more stuff you put on, the more drag you get in the water. So if the current starts picking up a little bit, I even sometimes go down to just one hook, and I could hold with a 2-pound sinker when everyone's going up to 3 or 4. All that makes a big difference in deep water. And the only difference I've seen with the jewelry is in the wintertime, you catch more dogfish than the guy using a plain hook. Besides that, I've outfished guys with a plain hook, and they're using all types of glow beads and squid skirts and all this stuff, A tile fish, I don't think really care about the jewelry.
And it's worse in tangles.
Yeah.
On top of that, getting the squid skirts or the rubber squids in the tangle also makes it even harder. And you're not getting tangled all the time, but it helps a lot to make things go more smoothly.
Since we've been stuck on the tangle part, on party boats, you want to hold your rod the whole time when you're fishing. That helps with tangles. If someone has to walk a fish down the side as it's floating up, on private boats and charter boats, it's a little different. Like I said, there's less people involved. But a lot of guys end up getting lazy, and they put their rod in the dead stick and they walk away, and then it gets into a tangle when it could have easily been just, you could have just paid attention and walked around someone. You do want to keep your rod in your hand the whole time you're fishing on a party boat.
Yeah, there's our rig. All right.
Covered that.
Yeah, we didn't cover the braid.
With the braid, you could get away with 50-pound test braid for most part. I wouldn't recommend going more than 65, but you can. I've seen guys use up to 80. It just helps with holding bottom. I've caught in 30-pound fish with 50-pound test braid. And like I said, you hold bottom better. Instead of going up to a 3-pound, you could still be getting away with a 2-pound sinker. Just like inshore fishing, the lighter your line is, the more you could hold.
Yeah. A lot of times on our hand crank rods, we'll put 50, and on the electric reels we have on our charter boat, we'll have 65. Just because there might be a little bit more pressure, and you want a little thicker line on the electric to make it easier to work with.
And the slow pitch thing is a whole different other
yeah,
story.
We'll get to that in a bit.
So with reels, I'm a big fan of Ocean Max. For the price, it's like a mini winch. It's got the right gear ratio. It's 4.5 to 1. I've used 2-speed reels in the past, and the 2-speed reels, when you put it in low gear, it's always too slow, and high gear is too fast. With that, you could just put that on a rail and just crank nice and easy, and it's the right ratio. You don't kill yourself.
And the very important factor is the handle that no one really thinks about when they're buying a Tilefish reel is you want to be able to really like have something to grab onto. If you just have a little knob or something, or you're just using a few of your fingers, it makes it a lot harder to hand crank. You know, the giant power handle is definitely a day saver when, you know, even when you're not catching fish, just reeling up lead, this will make a whole different day way better. And, you know, these are stock on these. You don't have to get a different handle for it or anything. I mean, they have the knob on the Saltists are pretty good too. You know, you just want something you could be able to grab. You know, this you could grab with your full fist, and you could really hold on to it to just make it easier to actually crank. And, you know, it's extended all the way out, so you have a little bit more of a rotation going to make it easier to reel as well.
Is this the 9?
This is the 10.
Yeah, if you go with an Ocean Max, I recommend a 10 or an 11. The 10, I use a 10, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I've used it up to, you know, in 850 foot of water, so.
You really just have to match how much line you're about going to need. You know, you figure you could fill the reel up with braid, and you know the 10 has plenty of line left over. Even if you get cut off by accident for some reason, you could still have more than enough line to hold. And you know, you could go down. You could use anything as long as it has enough line and it's comfortable enough to reel. This is just, you know, kind of the best stock reel. You know, you don't have to do any upgrades to the handle. It has a lot more torque. You know, you don't want speed when it comes to these reels because you'll kill yourself. So these have a little bit of a lower gear ratio to make it easier to reel.
Yep, and rule of thumb, I guess most tackle stores will try to put 500 yards of line on there for you when you're deep dropping, so.
And then this is the electric reel that we now have. You want to start with that?
So Tanacom 750s used to be the go-to reel, but they're getting rid of them. This is the 800, which is a little beefier. That's what we have on our boat rods. Someone charters our boat and they don't have any gear. That's what we're going to give them, is that setup right there.
And with the electrics, they're a little tricky to figure out at first. These setups we have to actually go put in the rail if whoever is coming on our boat doesn't want to hold the rod the whole day. We have an adjust-a-butt that you could actually set it up in the rod holder so it's over the side so you could fish with it in the rod holder and just watch the tip. Or if you want to stand, you know, this isn't that heavy to hold and you can still fish normally. These reels do fit on those standard rods as well. The Tanacom 750 is a little bit smaller, but like Paul said, they discontinued it, of course, because it's nice. So, you know, this is what we're stuck with. It has a lot of balls to it. You know, you could really put some heat on some fish. You don't want to, but if you needed to, you know, they have a lot more torque than the 750s that you could hear struggling a little bit. And when you're electric reel fishing, if you're fishing with it in the rod holder, you're going to have to use circle hooks. And when you're getting a bite, a lot of times I like to just put it in free spool, let them take it for a second, and then you could just put it in gear and you hook them with the power. You know, if you, the reel, you don't really need to do a lot with. You know, small adjustments, that's fine, but when you go to set the hook, you want to bring it up with this little lever here, and
you're gonna hook the fish with full power.
Yeah.
That's gonna be the hook set, and then as soon as you see the fish is hooked, you want to back down on it. Otherwise, you'll rip the hook out of the fish's mouth on the way up.
It's kind of a in the moment thing of how fast you're gonna reel the fish in. You know, you have to kind of gauge. It's hard to explain. As you're watching it come up, you're gonna watch your tip. If you see them start digging, you start backing off on it a little bit. You know, a lot of people when they electric reel fish, they just turn the electric reel on and they turn their brains off and then they just let the fish do whatever, and they lose them half the time. But electric reel fishing, you almost have to pay attention more because you have to watch the tip, predict what's going on, and play with the throttle the whole time. Because if you just turn it on and then turn around and start drinking a beer, there's a good chance you're going to lose the fish or get tangled up or cut somebody off with the braid. And
well, if you think about it, when you're fishing with a conventional reel, if you're, say, jigging bluefish, and the fish goes to run, you're going to stop reeling so you can take drag. If you just press a button and walk away from it and the fish wants to dig down, you could either pop the fish off or pull the hook out of it if it's in full power. So you have to play the fish right. It's not like you're not turning the handle, but you're just playing with the button. The fish is starting to dig down a little bit, you want to back off on it so it could take some drag.
Yep. So that's all with the electric if you want.
For a cheap setup, the Daiwa Protus is my favorite. When you're on party boats, you want something about 8 foot. Charter boats, smaller boats, you could probably get away with something around 7 to 7.5 foot. You don't need that much of a swing when you're on a smaller boat. The Protuses, I think they go around for somewhere between 200 and 250 bucks. And I've fished with them with up to 4 pounds of lead, and they hold. It's great. It works out great.
Yeah, even with a 2 pound lead, you're bending a little bit, but it's right where you need it. And if you go up to a 3 or 4, it's still bending a little more, but you can get away with it.
I used to tell people you want like a heavy-duty codfish stick is what I used to tell people, but codfishing is becoming a thing of the past, and not many people know what a codfish stick is. So, besides the Protus, I've seen people use heavy-duty ugly sticks that have worked. We use the Centaur over there for the electric reels. You could go to any offshore tackle store like Trophy or Capital and just ask them, I want a good deep drop setup, and they have a bunch of different options for you in stock.
Yeah.
But for a basic, for on the cheaper side of things, that Daiwa Protus is my go-to.
It's a good start.
Tilefish, they eat a lot of different baits. Again, I usually put a strip bait on and a whole squid. They usually like, the strip bait usually want it to be something greasy that they could sniff out. Salmon belly works. Mackerel strips work, but they fall off quick. Salmon belly, fluke belly, even silver eel, that all works because it stays on the hook. If you could catch an albacore, a false albacore, a bonita, strip them up, they work great because they're greasy, shiny, and they last a little longer than what a mackerel would. You don't want anything too big, regular size strip that you would use for fluke, something that's like 4 or 5 inches long the most. You don't want anything jumbo, otherwise you'll keep missing the fish. The other thing about tilefish is 9 times out of 10, if you do miss a fish, if you drop back to him, he's going to bite it again. A lot of people, when they lose a fish or they miss a fish, and it's they're still close to the bottom, they'll just keep reeling up and get upset. I've seen it several times where I tell them drop it back down. As soon as they hit the bottom, the fish is biting again. So don't get upset if you miss a fish. If you have bait on or you have a strip bait on that's gonna hold, drop it back down, they'll grab it again.
Yeah. A lot of times we'll do a squid and a strip bait. And it's kind of tile fishing in the sense with bait, it's kind of like black fishing where you'll notice that they're keyed in on like one bait more or less. For some reason they'll eat salmon strips that day a little bit more.
You will notice certain strip baits will work better during the day, during the trip. The best strip bait to use is something fresh. We made a trip last year where they were catching them on a certain strip bait, and I ended up filleting a small golden. They do eat each other too, and I started out fishing everyone else because it was the freshest bait down there. They do. You could strip up small goldens or small blue lines. They work great for them too. Like you used to fluke fishing, you always strip up a short or whatever, and it's, same thing.
And a lot of times with the squid, just a little fun tidbit is I would always go with the Lulago squid because they're smaller and you could put them on whole if you're getting the right ones instead of the Elix squid, which are just bigger. And the one right here is Lulago, and that's just out of the box, so you don't have to cut them in half. You could put one or two on a bait if if they're using squid, you could do one or two. You don't have to cut them in half. If they're a little big, if they're maybe that big, so if they're about 8-9 inches, you want to cut them in half. But if you're confident they're small enough, the Lulago squid are a little bit better.
They're definitely better.
Yeah.
What else with the bait?
I think that's really it.
So when you're bait fishing, you're more or less deep water fluke fishing. You want, if you drift too quick, it's going to be harder to catch them. If you drift too slow and you're not covering enough ground, it's tough to catch them. They do like to see the baits moving. So as you're drifting, you're bouncing your bait along the bottom as you would fluking. I don't know if anybody here remembers dragging bait for fluke. Now it's all bucktailing and chicken rigs. But yeah, you would just, as you're drifting, just bounce your sinker along the bottom. It's just like you would be fluking at Cholera or Hempstead Reef or whatever.
Just have to make sure you're moving the mud around to get their attention because they're trying to look for anything different that's going on around them to look for food. And if they hear the sinker moving around, they'll be more likely to go to your bait versus somebody who's just dragging on the bottom, not making as much noise.
Also, when you are drifting fast, I have noticed, and I learned from Jeff, if you scope out too far and you're not getting a bite and everyone around you is catching fish, you should reel up and drop straight down. You'll probably get a bite right away. For whatever reason, if you have too much scope out, I don't know if it's the angle of the bait or what, but that does have an effect where you're not going to get a bite and everyone else around you is catching them.
That's really it for methods. We're getting there.
Again, with conditions, I did mention drifting too quick and whatnot. So, on a small boat, you're not going to go out if it's nasty anyway. But as far as like party boats go, if you're going out on a party boat and they're going and the forecast says it's blowing 25 or more, it's not going to be a good trip. You're going to need 5 pounds of lead, and you're going to be drifting way too quick. On my dad's boat, or even with Jeff, we would cut it at 20 knots. If there's going to be a long period of the trip or the majority of the trip is going to be 20 knots or more, I would just cancel the trip because you're wasting your time. It's not going to be fun for anybody, and the catch is going to be way down. So the ideal drifting conditions for tilefish, you want to drift around 7/10 of a knot. That's what I noticed is the best. Once you get up towards a knot, you start increasing the weight, and you're going up from maybe a 2 to a 3 or whatever. You start drifting too fast. Once you get up to like a knot and a half, you're just drifting way too fast, and it's tough. You're gonna get stuck fishing shallower water. You're gonna be trying to catch smaller fish. You can't really fish the deep stuff. And when you're drifting too slow, much like fluking, and you're staying in one spot, number one, you're not covering enough ground, especially if you're exploring. And the tilefish want to see that stuff move. So if you got no drift at all and you're just pretty much anchored, you're not going to catch much.
And tilefish like the sun. On cloudy days, they just don't bite as well. Whatever reason.
People laugh at me when I say that, but I told him that, and now he believes me. There is something called biological luminescence. When the sun comes up, everything down there lights up. It tells the tilefish to eat. When it's dark, that's why you don't catch as much at night as you would during the day. There are times, during certain moons where you could catch tilefish really good at night, but that's only certain times. The majority of the time, they're a sun up to sundown fish.
That's really
That's if you're going.
weather map.
Yeah, it's just a weather map from Windy. If you're ever going tile fishing, and you should look at the weather before you go. get an idea. You know, like I said, if you're on a small boat, you probably shouldn't be going out if it's blowing 20 anyway. If you're going out on a party boat and they're still going and it's going to be blowing 25 or 30, you know, it's going to be a rough trip and you might be better off just staying home.
That's really it for me. All right. Well, this is a new type of fishing for a lot of guys up here. It's slow pitch jigging. And I got into it. I learned how to do it in Florida, and I brought it up here. And I've had a lot of success tile fishing with it. And I personally go with Temple Reef a lot. There's, you know, a million different companies now, and this is my lighter tile fish setup actually. And you could fish with a lot lighter gear than you think you have to. And this line is only 10-pound test braid, and I've had 20-pound grays on it. And you just have to make sure when you're using the light line, you're not horsing the fish in. You know, it's a little bit more technical. You could cut through the water a lot better with a lot lighter line. The heaviest line that I have on any of my slow pitch reels is 30-pound test braid. That's all you need. Because go ahead.
Don't get that mixed up with your bait rods. Don't put 10-pound test on your bait rods.
Yeah, you'll snap the fish off.
This is a whole different type of fishing, whole different science to it.
Yeah, you know, this is a Temple Reef Elevate that I like to use when I'm kind of in the shallower water for the lighter stuff. And usually when you're trying to figure out what rod to use, slow pitch rods are all rated in grams. And when you're trying to figure out how many grams might I possibly need, the general rule of thumb is 1 foot per gram. So if you're fishing 600 feet, yeah, you might need 600 grams. But if you're using a narrower jig and lighter braid, I could get down a 200-gram jig, 400 or 500 feet of water on nicer condition days, but you more than can. And a lot of times, the jigs you're primarily going to be using for tile fish, at least in the Hudson and maybe down in Wilmington Canyon, is anywhere from a 300 to a 500-gram jig. Once you get over 500 grams, it really starts to kill the action from the rod. You could also use, they have the Temple Reef Innovate, which I have at our booth actually, with an accurate 600 NN that holds a lot more line. This reel, it's a Saltus 20P that works fine. The whole thing is you want a reel that's fast enough to, well, this reel isn't particularly fast enough, but when you set the hook, it's just like yo-yoing jigging. You're just coming up and letting it go down. That's all it is, just like any other jigging. On the bottom, I know a lot of YouTube videos, you see a lot of crazy actions reeling up and off the bottom, but we're just going for tile fish. It's just like all the other jigs. These ones just look a little fancier and they go down a little quicker. I use accurates a lot of the time just because they're very light, an accurate 500N or an accurate 600 NN, which is a very narrow spool. And on most trips, I'll bring usually 3 setups. I'll have one with 10, 20, and 30, and you could change up based on the conditions. You know, you could come down 100 grams in jig size sometimes by just switching down to 10-pound test from 20. And, you know, they're very aggressive. Sometimes it'll only be a jig bite, and sometimes the bait still wins, but, you know, the whole setup is a lot lighter, and it's a little bit more fun. I like the longer narrow jigs seem to work better because they go down faster, but also, besides for butterfish, a lot of the bait out there, squid, mackerel, anything else, is long and narrow anyway. So like this jig or something like this, this is a seafloor control arc jig, which you could use anything close to this, but this is a 400-gram jig. And I would have to say 80% of the time, if the condition, you could use a 400-gram jig. This is usually the go-to right here. And you're just yo-yoing it. You could choose different colors. You know, you could work the jig a little faster, a little slower. And it's a lot it's a lot more fun. And with the assist hooks, you could use 1, 2, 3. I choose 4 because I use a lighter gauge hook. So I'll use these Major Craft 3.0s, and it's a lighter gauge hook itself. So when you're hooking the fish, it's actually you need less force for the hook to go through their mouth. And then when you're reeling the fish in, to have 4 hooks on it, you have 4 points of contact, which are spreading out the actual weight, that the pressure you're putting on each hook. Tile fishing, at least in the Hudson and sometimes in Wilmington, it's mostly mud. So you only lose your jig really by operator error. When you're, as dumb as it sounds, when you're casting it out and it just happens to get stuck and it just flies off, you're like, and shit. And, yeah. And there's, that's the Temple Reef Elevate. This rod is 7.8 off the top of my head. And it's a little nicer for party boat fishing because you get a little bit more of a swing. And that one is rated from 350 to 650. And that's a 300 gram jig right there. And you can see the 4 hooks set up, same as that. And then the nice thing about jigging is you get some bycatch too. So when, luckily when you're jigging, you can't really run out of bait. So you can keep jigging until you drift out too far. But as you're reeling, even when you're going down, reeling up, there's always a chance you could still hook a tuna, which is nice. I've caught a lot of tuna by accident, just reeling up, and when you're trying to catch tilefish on the gear, you get a little upset, like, shit, another tuna. And then that's another Temple Reef rod. The shorter rods are easier on smaller boats. That one is actually 6 foot 9 inches, and that one's rated to 600 grams. And you'll always find a kind of a sweet spot for each rod, right in the middle. Like that rod really likes the 350 gram jig for whatever reason. It's just, you can notice the flick of the jig, it sets it up a lot nicer.
Is that the Benny Ortiz version?
No, that one's it's a limited edition, jewel edition one that they don't make, but that's a levitate. And innovates the Benny Ortiz one he designed for the Yankee Caps. And that's it. And now we could go for questions.
Anybody have questions?
What's the knot that you're using on the heavy lines?
For the SPJ or
You say
for the rigs?
80 and 100 and 150, and you're tying hand knots.
I tie an improved clinch knot.
And
Okay, that's what I use, but it's just so at only 5 turns. You don't try to go
Yeah.
to 7.
I use a nail knot. I learned that with Jeff. All it is 3 wraps, and it's proven. It's quick, easy, and it holds.
Yeah.
That's
It's a little harder with the heavier line, no matter what. But
Okay, so I'm doing it right.
yeah, no, it's
That's what I was doing.
yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
If we wanted to book a trip with you, where could we find you today and where can we find you online?
Right over there in the gym on the back wall, and we have a Facebook and website and everything.
If you want to check us out, keelhaulerfishing.com, or stop by the booth there. We'll give you a card. You can talk. We're giving a deal out today, 10% off your charter. So if you're interested, give us a shout, or we could add you to a call list. If we ever do an open boat trip, we'll put you on the call list.
What's your action for the snowfish jig?
Usually, I'll just do a nice, it's just a light, you pull up, just like yo-yoing it on a normal diamond jig, just a nice light up. So you just get load all of the weight on the tip of the rod, and then the rod will flick the actual jig up. And then once you get to the top of your swing, you want to go right back down, so you let the jig naturally flutter how it's designed to. You don't want any pressure on the jig once it's going back down, because that'll mess up the flutter action on it.
Are you reeling?
Nope. Once you're on the bottom, you're trying to just stay on the bottom. You're going to have to do minor adjustments, but you want to try to stay, as long as,
Bottom, you're gonna keep pounding it, right?
that's it. You just up and down. If if you're starting to scope out a little bit, you let a little bit of line out, but you don't want, if you want to try to stay in touch with it the whole time. And as you're letting it down, you want to just not too quick, because you want to be able to, sometimes even in 600, 700, 800 feet, you could feel them bite, hit the jig on the way down sometimes, but you don't want to keep tension on it. You need to kind of let it back down following it so it still does the flutter action. Because the whole point of the slow pitch jigging is just, the rods are slow when it comes to like the bend. So when it's loading up at the tip and you're pulling it up, it'll flip the jig up actually sideways. Instead of just going up and down, that little extra flick will actually set the jig up like this a bit better to flutter, because fluttering like this looks a lot more like a dead fish, instead of when you're just going up, and then if you just let it straight back down, a lot of times the jig will just kind of, it'll still have action to it like this, but you want to try to get the jig to flutter like this so the fish is more apt to biting it, because this one takes a lot longer to hit the bottom, which is what you want. You want the most amount of time of it fluttering to attract the most attention. Just having it going up and down, if you're leaving tension on it, you won't attract as many bites. You'll still catch them, because luckily for us, fish are dumb, but if they're not biting if they're a little finicky, you really need the jig to flutter. So you're just going up and then coming down slow on it, trying to kind of stay in touch with it. That's all. Does that answer?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
What's the biggest tilefish you've caught and you've caught?
Oh, I've seen plenty of big tilefish caught
He
on my
mostly
dad's
runs
boat.
the boat.
It's hard fishing when you're running the boat. My personal biggest is only 33 pounds.
Yeah. And thanks to him, I had a 42-pound golden, and I actually caught a 23.5-pound gray also, which, the grays don't get as big, but they definitely fight just as hard. They're the whole time up they're fighting, and even when you put them on deck, it's like you just pulled them off the bottom a second ago, and they're pretty ferocious.
I got a couple. On the reels.
Yes, sir.
Captain Paul, he said that a lot of the times, the high speed is too high, the low speed is too low. What's a good ratio?
4.5 to 1 is what the Ocean Max has it set at, and that's what I found out to be the best.
4.5
Oh,
to 1?
yeah, you want something around that ratio. I noticed, like, I used to use a 2-speed reel when I first started, and like I said, high gear was just way too quick, and low gear, it took you forever to reel up,
And not only with that, a few times I've noticed with the low gear reels, the tilefish, once they get to a certain point, they embolize where their stomach comes out of the mouth, and they'll start floating. And sometimes you'll actually just lose your fish on the way up because it floats faster than you're reeling up, and it'll just float itself off the hook. And then you watch it pop up a quarter mile away, and you freak out and ask the captain to go get it.
Yep.
What about the slow pitch jigging reel? What's the ratio on that?
So with the slow pitch, with the accurates on most of the reels I use, that's a 6 to 1. And that's because when you do set the hook, if you're at the top of because it's all the same motion, whether you're setting the hook or just working the jig again. And a lot of times, since the rod is so light, you need a high-speed reel, like a 6 to 1. Because when you set up, you have to reel down on it quick to really get the hook, give it a little bit more of a set almost. It's kind of hard to explain, but it helps catch up from being all the way up here and getting all the slack out of your line.
What about reeling the fish up on 6 to 1?
So you're going to always, with the slow pitch gear, you're going to be a little more gentle with everything, because for most of my leaders, I'm using anywhere from 40 and the heaviest 80 for mono as my leader. And then you're going to feel it. And a lot of times with the high torque reels, it's mostly for just weight of the lead. Not so much fighting the fish. the high torque reels make it easier to reel the heavy lead in itself on top of the fish. With the slow pitch jigging, since you're not reeling in as much weight overall, you know, a fish when it's fighting, yeah, it's fighting, but it's a lot easier to reel a fish in than just the lead. The high torque reels help with the lead a lot too.
That and the slow pitch rods, they have a lot more give to them. You know, you could bend them in a U, you know, so that helps out too with the high speed. It gives you a little break on that.
Any other questions? We got you?
Yeah, oh, I got plenty of questions.
Keep it.
Captain Paul, I saw your video on the nail knot, and I tried to find that knot. I cannot find that knot anywhere.
I mean, if you want, stop by the booth. We could, we'll have a little practice session there.
We could play with string.
On doctoring up your gear, you know, when you drop down, you're saying, you know, the one hook or two hook works. But
Yeah.
I'm fairly new at Tilefish.
Okay.
One of the things that was drilled in me was you need glow. So they could,
You don't need glow. Glow helps. If any of the things that you put on your rig extra don't glow, then they're kind of a waste. But the glow helps, but a lot of times they hear and smell stuff before they see stuff. And, you know, at that depth, there's not a lot of things that particularly glow. So it helps a lot. It gets anything to get their attention helps, you know. Glow jigs help, you know, and anything that glows helps. But you just, you know, we have one glow bead on our rigs just because I like to feel better about it. But you don't need them, you know. Like Paul said, you don't need them. It's the smell of the bait.
Yeah, I just use a strip bait and a squid, and that's all I need. I don't put any jewelry on at all.
No problem. And we'll see you at the booth to practice the nail knot.
You sell a nail knot gadget, and it's a knot picker, and you slip the line through it. I think you can even buy a nail knot tool.
Oh, I just use my nail.
Yeah. And one last thing, actually, with the slow pitch jigging, you're going to have to learn how to do an FG knot or tie a shorter leader or a PR knot, just because the guides are so small and it makes it a little easier for the line to go through all the guides. And
I think our time is...
our time is up.
What do you recommend for the electric reel when you're reeling in?
It's more...
Start with half and go down or up from there.
Yeah, you just got to pay attention to the rod. When you're fighting a fish on a conventional rod, you know, there's times you reel up. You might not notice it, but there's times you're reeling up faster when there's less pressure on the fish, or the fish is giving you less pressure on the rod. And when it starts to dig, you actually slow your reeling down, or you even stop, so it has a chance to take drag. It's the same thing with the electric reel. It's just you're using a button. You know, you're controlling it with a button.
Yeah,
So-
you got to pay attention a lot more with the electric. They're not bad. It's a little bit of a learning curve to really learn how to use them the proper way, so you don't start losing fish more than, you know, anybody wants to.
Well, my dad learned how to use one at 72 years old, so I'm
did.
sure you guys could figure it out too.
Yeah, but
Your booth is out that on that side?
yep.
It's in the gym, booth 166.
Every time you turn, there's another alley available.
Yeah, you know,